Imogen. I think it also helps to just explain my background to give some context. I actually, I worked in private equity in infrastructure and project development for about 11 years, and prior to that I was in public equities. And the whole reason why I went into finance in the first place was because I was interested in how we could attract capital to underserved areas that didn't have capital and create jobs and build small and medium-sized businesses from the ground up. And I didn't study finance in school. I studied history, politics, and African studies. And I really appreciate a lot of the conversation here today about the importance of preserving indigenous culture and pre-colonial values, because that was something that really interested me when I was in high school and college, and that's what I thought I was going to go into. And I had a bit of a transformational experience in college where I spent some time in Tanzania volunteering in the aid industry, and realizing that it was doing more harm than good, and realizing that local people in Tanzania wanted to have a similar life as I had in New York. And so I thought, well, you know, foreign investment will eventually make its way into Tanzania, and it might be led by big multinational corporations and large investors, but wouldn't it be great if we could attract capital to small, medium-sized businesses that local people are creating, so that we could help them to grow their economy, create jobs, and preserve their culture. So I spent the first 4 years of my career in public equities because I didn't know anything about finance, realized I was in the wrong space, and realized that I wanted to go into private equity, because in private equity you can invest in smaller businesses, you can take control positions so that you can ensure that there's strong ESG integration and strong values, and it seemed like a great space to be in. And around the time of the financial crisis, I was at Bear Stearns and had the opportunity to leave the public equity space and go into private equity. And I was so excited because there were some private equity funds that were doing this work that I wanted to do. And that type of private equity is called growth private equity. Over the years, I got involved with other types of private equity that had different flavors. And so, one of the largest segments of the private equity market is the leveraged buyout space. And that's sort of the traditional regional type of private equity and what people typically think of. And that can be large investors taking out large amounts of debt to buy large companies. And the debt actually is at the company level, and sometimes companies aren't in a position to repay that debt, and the companies can go under. Also, a lot of private equity investors don't, they take control positions in companies and they don't share that control or engage stakeholders. And so it sounds like from what I've heard over the past day and a half, that's a big problem here in Maui, which is that private equity investors are just coming in and their primary stakeholder that they're concerned about are their own investors, and of course themselves. And so that kind of private equity can be very detrimental. I started to realize some of the issues of private equity over the past few years because even though I was in growth private equity and not the leveraged buyout type of private equity, and there was other types of private equity as well, but I started to realize that even if we're when thinking about income and wealth inequality, even if we're paying a living wage to workers in the portfolio companies that we're investing in, or even if we're trying to narrow executive to average worker compensation ratios, or pay more than a living wage to help workers build wealth, the rate of wealth of private equity managers continues to grow at an exponentially faster rate than workers in or beneficiaries of these portfolio companies, and it's largely because of this compensation model that I was asked to mention. I'm not going to go into it in a lot of detail, but private equity funds, they raise capital from large institutional investors like pension funds, and they charge a 2% roughly, or it's increasingly less because people are starting to realize how egregious this 2% annual management fee is, but on the amount of capital that's invested, and then also take roughly, and there's a lot of detail and nuances in this as well, roughly 20% of the profits of the portfolio companies. And I started to think, people are concerned about banking executive compensation, They make like $30 million a year. These private equity executives of the mega fund managers are making $100 million a year or more. Steve Schwarzman, who's the founder and CEO of Blackstone, which I understand is, a big concern for you all. I mean, there was an announcement the other day that he made over $500 million last year. And that's been the case for the past several years. So we need to look at the way private equity is structured in order for it to really be useful. And it can be a useful tool, and we'll get into that a little bit. I feel like I've talked for a long time. But that's something that we're working on at the Predistribution Initiative, is how can we adjust the private equity structures, not only so that they share more of the wealth generated with workers and communities, and they charge folks like the state of Illinois less to enhance the return to their beneficiaries as well. But also, how do we engage stakeholders better and give them more say and control in the investments that are being made?